The dust kicked up around Katherine Jordan's worn boots as she stood in front of the stage coach office in Tombstone, Arizona, clutching her carpetbag so tightly her knuckles had gone white. And when the stage driver shook his head for the third time that scorching August morning in 1882, she felt her last thread of hope beginning to fray. "Madam, I already told you twice," the driver said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Company policy says no single women traveling alone to Silver Ridge. That route goes through some of the roughest territory in the Arizona Territory, and I will not have it on my conscience when something happens to you." Katherine felt her cheeks burn with a combination of fury and desperation. She had scraped together every penny she had for this ticket, having received word that her Aunt Margaret had taken ill and needed someone to help run her boarding house. At 23 years old, Katherine had already survived the death of her parents, worked her fingers raw as a seamstress in Tombstone for 2 years, and endured more hardship than most women twice her age. The last thing she needed was some stubborn stage driver telling her she could not board because of her gender. "Sir, I have purchased a ticket," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have every right to passage on this stage. And I have every right to refuse passengers I deem at risk," the driver countered. "Find yourself a traveling companion or a husband, and then we will talk about passage." Katherine opened her mouth to argue further when a deep voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "She's riding with me today." Both Katherine and the stage driver turned to see a tall man approaching from the direction of the saloon. He wore dusty leather chaps over dark trousers, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms, and a black hat that shadowed eyes the color of storm clouds. A gun belt sat comfortably on his hips, and he walked with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. Katherine guessed he was somewhere in his mid-20s, with a strong jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble and a face that might have been handsome if it were not set in such serious lines. The driver squinted at the stranger. "That's so, Kade." "That's so, Thomas," the man confirmed, stopping beside Katherine. He smelled like leather and sage, and when he glanced down at her, something in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "Miss Jordan here is traveling under my protection. That satisfy your company policy." Thomas scratched his chin, considering. "You know what you are getting into. That is a 2-day journey with an overnight stop at the way station." "I am aware." Kade's voice held a note of finality that suggested the conversation was over. The stage driver shrugged. "Your funeral. Or rather, your responsibility. Load up then. We leave in 10 minutes. As Thomas walked away to check the horses, Katherine turned to face her unexpected savior. Up close, she could see the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow and the way his eyes held both kindness and something else she could not quite name, wariness perhaps, or a deep sadness. "Mr. Kade, I appreciate your intervention, but I do not even know you," she said carefully. "I cannot accept such a gesture without understanding why you would offer it." "Name's Kade Nolan," he corrected. "And I offered because Thomas is right about one thing. That route is dangerous, and you would be foolish to travel it without someone watching your back. I have business in Silver Ridge anyway, so it makes no difference to me whether I ride alone or with company." Katherine studied his face, looking for any sign of ulterior motives. She had learned in her years of independence to be cautious of men who offered help too freely. But Kade Nolan's expression remained neutral, almost businesslike, and something in her gut told her he was sincere. "I can pay for my own passage," she said firmly. "I will not be indebted to anyone." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost but not quite a smile. "I was not suggesting otherwise, Miss Jordan. I am simply offering to serve as your escort so Thomas will stop being stubborn and let you board. How do you know my name, small town? Word travels. He picked up her carpetbag before she could protest. We should board. Thomas gets ornery when passengers make him run behind schedule. Catherine followed Kade to the stagecoach, her mind whirling with questions. She climbed into the coach and settled onto the worn leather seat, watching as Kade stowed her bag on top with the other luggage, and then swung himself up to sit beside the driver rather than inside with her. She felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief because she would not have to make awkward conversation during the journey, and disappointment because some traitorous part of her had been curious to know more about the mysterious cowboy who had come to her aid. The stage lurched forward, and Catherine gripped the edge of the seat as they rolled out of Tombstone. She caught one last glimpse of Kade sitting next to Thomas, his hat pulled low against the bright morning sun, before she settled back and tried to prepare herself for the long journey ahead. The first few hours passed uneventfully. The landscape outside the window transformed from the dusty streets of Tombstone to rocky desert terrain dotted with saguaro cacti and scrub brush. The heat was oppressive, and Catherine dabbed at her forehead with a handkerchief, grateful she had thought to bring a canteen of water. The stage rattled and bounced over the rough road, and she found herself wondering what possessed anyone to build settlements in such harsh country. Then again, she supposed people went where opportunity called, whether that opportunity came in the form of silver mines or cattle ranches, or the simple need to start over somewhere new. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and allow the passengers to stretch their legs. Catherine climbed out of the coach on shaky legs, grateful for the chance to move. Kade appeared at her elbow, offering her a canteen. "Drink," he said. "The heat out here can sneak up on you." She took the canteen and sipped the lukewarm water, trying not to notice the way his eyes followed her movements. "Thank you. How much farther to the way station?" "Another 6 hours or so, if we do not run into trouble." He took the canteen back and drank deeply before wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Thomas wants to make good time. The sooner we get to the station, the sooner we can rest the horses properly." "You mentioned you have business in Silver Ridge," Catherine said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Are you a rancher?" Kade's expression shuddered slightly. "I work cattle when the work is available. Mostly I track things." "Things?" "Stolen livestock, outlaws sometimes. Whatever people are willing to pay me to find." He settled his hat more firmly on his head. "It is not glamorous work, but it pays." "It sounds dangerous," Catherine observed. "So is sewing in a poorly lit room for 16 hours a day, I imagine. Different kinds of danger, that is all." Before she could ask how he knew she was a seamstress, Thomas called out that it was time to move on. Kade touched the brim of his hat in a brief salute and headed back to his position on the driver's bench. Catherine climbed back into the coach, her mind full of questions about Kade Nolan. He was clearly observant, picking up details about people and storing them away. She found herself wondering what else he had noticed about her, and the thought made her oddly self-conscious. She smoothed her dusty skirts and tried to focus on the landscape passing by, but her attention kept drifting back to the broad-shouldered figure sitting above her, guiding them through increasingly wild territory. As the afternoon wore on, the road became rougher. Catherine was jostled around inside the coach, and she had to brace herself with both hands to avoid being thrown against the walls. She heard Kade and Thomas talking above her, their voices tight with concentration, and she leaned toward the window to see what had them concerned. The road ahead narrowed as it wound between two rocky outcroppings, creating a natural bottleneck. It was exactly the sort of place where outlaws might wait in ambush, and Catherine felt her heart begin to race. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small derringer her father had given her years ago, checking to make sure it was loaded. She might be traveling under Kade's protection, but she had learned long ago that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. The stage slowed as they approached the narrow passage. Catherine could hear Thomas clicking his tongue at the horses, urging them forward cautiously. Everything seemed to happen at once. A shot rang out and Thomas cursed loudly. The horses screamed and reared, and the stage lurched violently to one side. Catherine was thrown against the door, her derringer clattering to the floor. She heard Kade shout something she could not make out, and then more gunfire erupted from somewhere above. Catherine scrambled to retrieve her gun, her hands shaking. Through the window, she could see at least 3 men on horseback emerging from behind the rocks, their faces covered with bandanas. One of them fired toward the driver's bench, and Catherine's blood ran cold. She leaned out the window, took aim at the nearest outlaw, and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough to make the man wheel his horse around in surprise. "Stay inside," Kade's voice boomed from above, and then he was dropping down from the bench, landing in a crouch beside the coach. His gun was already in his hand, and he fired twice in quick succession. One of the outlaws went down, and the others hesitated. "Thomas is hit," Kade said tersely, not taking his eyes off the remaining outlaws. "Can you handle the reins?" Catherine's mind raced. She had driven a farm wagon a few times as a girl, but a 6-horse stage-coach team was an entirely different proposition. Still, she could see blood dripping from the driver's bench, and she knew they did not have many options. "I can try," she said. "Good enough." Kade fired another shot, providing cover as Catherine climbed out of the coach and scrambled up to the bench. Thomas was slumped against the railing, clutching his shoulder, his face pale with pain. Catherine grabbed the reins with trembling hands and shouted at the horses, snapping the leather the way she had seen drivers do countless times. The team lunged forward, and Catherine nearly lost her grip. She wrapped the reins around her wrists and held on for dear life as the stage careened through the narrow passage. Behind her, she could hear more gunfire, and she prayed that Kade had managed to climb back aboard. The horses were panicked, running flat out, and all Catherine could do was try to steer them and hope they did not overturn the coach. They burst out of the narrow passage and onto open road, the horses still running wildly. Catherine's arms burned with the effort of controlling the team, but she did not dare let up. She could see a figure swinging up onto the back of the coach, and then Kade was climbing forward, hand over hand, until he reached the bench beside her. "I have them," he said, and Catherine gratefully released the reins into his capable hands. He began talking to the horses in a low, steady voice, gradually slowing their pace until they were moving at a more manageable gallop. Catherine sagged back against the bench, her heart hammering in her chest, and only then did she notice the blood on Kade's left sleeve. "You are hurt," she gasped. "Grazed," he said shortly. "Thomas," Catherine turned to the driver, who was breathing heavily but still conscious. "The bullet went through my shoulder," Thomas managed. "Hurts like hell, but I will live. That was some driving, miss." "That was pure panic," Catherine corrected, but she felt a surge of pride despite herself. "We need to get you to the way station so we can tend that wound properly." Kade pushed the horses harder, and Catherine could see the tension in his jaw. They covered the remaining distance to the way station in record time, arriving just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The station keeper, a weathered man named Bill, came running out when he saw the blood, and within minutes they had Thomas inside and Catherine was rolling up her sleeves to help. She had learned basic wound care from her mother, who had served as an informal nurse to their community back in Missouri. Her hands were steadier now that the immediate danger had passed, and she worked efficiently to clean and bandage Thomas's shoulder while Bill prepared a poultice. Kade stood nearby, watching with an unreadable expression. "Your turn," Catherine said when she finished with Thomas. "Sit down and let me look at that arm." Kade shook his head. "It is nothing, just a scratch." "It is bleeding through your shirt, which means it needs attention," Catherine said firmly. "Sit down, Mr. Nolan." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because he sighed and sat down on a bench near the fireplace. Catherine moved to stand in front of him and began carefully rolling up his sleeve. The bullet had indeed grazed him, leaving a deep furrow along the outside of his upper arm. It was not life-threatening, but it would need to be cleaned and bandaged to prevent infection. "This will sting," she warned, dampening a clean cloth with whiskey. Kade did not flinch when she pressed the cloth to his wound, though she saw his jaw tighten. She worked quickly, cleaning the wound and wrapping it with strips of clean linen. She was acutely aware of how close she was standing to him, close enough to see the golden flecks in his gray eyes and the faint lines at the corners of his mouth. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, and she found herself wondering what it would be like if those strong arms wrapped around her. The thought startled her so much that she nearly dropped the bandage. What was wrong with her? She had known this man for less than a day, and here she was having entirely inappropriate thoughts about him. She tied off the bandage with more force than necessary and stepped back quickly. "There. Keep it clean and it should heal without trouble." "Thank you," Kade said quietly. His eyes searched her face, and Catherine had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her carefully constructed walls. "You did well out there today." Not many people would have kept their heads in that situation. "I did what needed doing," Catherine said, smoothing her skirts to give her hands something to do. "As did you. If you had not intervened when you did, those outlaws would have taken everything and probably killed us in the process." "It is what I do," Kade said simply. He stood up, testing his arm gingerly. "Bill says Thomas will not be able to drive tomorrow. His shoulder needs rest." Catherine felt her stomach drop. "What does that mean for the journey?" "It means I will be driving," Kade said. "Bill knows someone in Silver Ridge who owes him a favor. He is sending word to have them meet us and take the stage back to Tombstone once we arrive. It will add some time to the schedule, but we will get there." "And what about you? Can you drive with that arm?" "I've done harder things with worse injuries," Kade assured her. "Get some rest tonight, Miss Jordan. Tomorrow will be another long day." Bill showed Catherine to a small but clean room with a narrow bed and a washstand. She cleaned herself up as best she could, washing away the dust and grime of the day, and changed into a fresh dress from her bag. Her hands were still trembling slightly from the aftermath of the attack, and she sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened. She could have died today. They all could have. If Kade had not been there, if he had not moved with such speed and precision, she would likely be dead or worse right now. She owed him her life, and the weight of that debt sat heavy on her shoulders. Catherine had always prided herself on her independence, on not needing anyone. But today had shown her the limits of what one person could do alone. There was a soft knock on her door, and when she opened it, she found Kade standing in the hallway holding a tray with a bowl of stew and some bread. "Bill's wife made supper," he said. "Thought you might be hungry." Catherine realized she was famished. She had not eaten since breakfast, and her stomach growled audibly at the smell of the food. "Thank you. That was very thoughtful." Kade nodded and turned to go, but Catherine found herself calling out to him. "Mr. Nolan, wait. Would you like to come in? I mean to share the food. There is more here than I can eat, and I thought perhaps we could talk." He hesitated, and Catherine wondered if she had overstepped. But then he nodded slowly and followed her into the room, leaving the door open for propriety's sake. They sat at the small table by the window, and Catherine divided the food between them. For a few minutes, they ate in companionable silence, both too hungry for conversation. "I never properly thanked you," Catherine said eventually, "for intervening with Thomas this morning and for everything that happened today. I would not be alive right now if not for you." Kade shook his head. "You saved yourself as much as I did." "That was a brave thing you did, climbing up to take those reins. Foolish, maybe, but brave." "Desperation has a way of making us brave," Catherine said with a slight smile. "Or foolish, as you say, though I am not sure there is much difference between the two sometimes." "There is a difference," Kade said seriously. "Bravery is knowing the danger and choosing to face it anyway. Foolishness is not understanding the danger in the first place. You knew exactly what you were risking today." Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "You seem to have a talent for appearing when you are most needed. How did you know I was trying to book passage on that stage this morning?" Kade looked down at his bowl. "I did not. I was heading to the station to arrange my own travel when I saw you arguing with Thomas. I know him well enough to recognize when he has made up his mind about something, and I could see you were not going to change it on your own. So you really were planning to travel to Silver Ridge regardless." "I was. Like I said, I have business there. Man named Henderson thinks someone has been rustling his cattle, and he hired me to look into it." Kade met her eyes. "I was not lying about that, if that is what you are worried about." "I was not worried," Catherine said, though she had been a little. "Though I confess I am curious why you would choose such a dangerous profession. Surely there are safer ways to make a living." Kade leaned back in his chair, and Catherine saw a shadow cross his face. "I had a ranch once. Small spread, but it was mine. Worked it with my brother, Matthew. We were building something good, something lasting." He paused, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. 3 years ago, a gang of outlaws came through looking for fresh horses. Matthew tried to stop them. They shot him in front of me and burned the barn to the ground. By the time I got him to town, it was too late. Catherine felt her throat tighten with sympathy. "I am so sorry. That must have been devastating." "I sold the ranch after that. Could not stand being there without him. Started tracking the men who killed him, and somewhere along the way I discovered I was good at it. Good at tracking, good at hunting. People started hiring me, and I found that bringing outlaws to justice gave me a purpose when I did not have much else." He looked at her, and the pain in his eyes made her want to reach across the table and take his hand. "So to answer your question, I chose this profession because it was the only thing that made sense after I lost everything else." "That is not true," Catherine said softly. "You could have chosen revenge and become exactly like the men who killed your brother. Instead, you chose justice. That speaks to your character, Mr. Nolan." "Call me Kade," he said. "I think after today we can dispense with formalities. Only if you call me Catherine." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face and made him look younger, less careworn. "Catherine it is." They talked for another hour, and Catherine found herself sharing things she rarely spoke about. She told him about losing her parents to cholera, about struggling to make a life for herself in Tombstone, about the fear and loneliness that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her. Kade listened without judgment, and when he shared his own stories of life on the trail, Catherine felt a connection forming between them that went deeper than simple gratitude. Finally, when the candles had burned low and exhaustion was pulling at them both, Kade stood to leave. "Get some rest," he said. "We will be leaving at first light." "Kade," Catherine said as he reached the door. He turned back, and she took a breath before continuing. I am glad you were at that stagecoach office this morning. I know it was chance, but I cannot help feeling that perhaps it was meant to be. I am glad, too, he said quietly. Good night, Catherine. After he left, Catherine lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind too full for sleep. She kept seeing Kade's face when he talked about his brother, the way his voice had broken slightly on Matthew's name. She thought about his smile, rare but genuine, and the way his presence made her feel both protected and challenged. She barely knew him, but already she could feel herself beginning to care, and that terrified her. Catherine had built walls around her heart to protect it from more pain, but Kade Nolan was slipping through her defenses as if they were made of paper. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Catherine helped Bill's wife prepare breakfast while the men readied the stage. Thomas was sitting up and eating, though he looked pale and would clearly need several days to recover properly. When it was time to leave, Catherine climbed into the coach while Kade took his position on the driver's bench. She found herself missing his company already, and she leaned out the window to watch him handle the reins with practiced ease. The landscape they traveled through that day was spectacular and harsh in equal measure. Red rock formations rose like cathedral spires against the brilliant blue sky, and the desert stretched out endlessly in all directions. Catherine saw a rattlesnake sunning itself on a rock and a hawk circling high above, hunting for prey. It was beautiful and dangerous, much like the man guiding their journey. They stopped several times to rest the horses and stretch their legs. During one such stop, Catherine walked a short distance from the road to admire a cluster of wildflowers that had somehow found purchase in the rocky soil. She was kneeling to examine them more closely when she heard footsteps behind her. Desert marigolds, Kade said, coming to stand beside her. They are tougher than they look, can survive with almost no water. They are beautiful, Catherine said, gently touching a golden petal. I used to love flowers when I was young. My mother kept a garden and she would let me help her tend it. After she died, I did not have the heart to keep it going. That is a shame, Kade said. Your mother would probably want you to have beauty in your life, not to give it up because she is gone. Catherine stood up, brushing dirt from her skirts. You are right, of course. I have been so focused on simply surviving that I forgot about actually living. My Aunt Margaret used to tell me that in her letters. She said life was meant to be lived, not merely endured. Your aunt sounds like a wise woman. She is. She is also stubborn and opinionated, and has never let anyone tell her what she can or cannot do. Catherine smiled at the thought. I think you would like her. If she is anything like you, I am sure I would, Kade said, and Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks at the compliment. They made good time that day, and by late afternoon, Catherine could see buildings appearing on the horizon. Silver Ridge was larger than she had expected, a thriving mining town nestled in a valley between two mountain ranges. The stage rolled down the main street as the sun began to set, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. Kade brought the stage to a stop in front of the depot, and Catherine climbed out on shaky legs. She had been traveling for 2 days, and every muscle in her body ached. But beneath the physical discomfort, she felt a strange sense of loss. The journey was over, which meant her time with Kade was ending. Let me help you find your aunt's boarding house, Kade offered, lifting her carpet bag down from the top of the stage. You have done more than enough already, Catherine protested weakly. Humor me, he said with that slight smile she was coming to treasure. I want to make sure you arrive safely. They walked through the streets of Silver Ridge as dusk fell, and Catherine was struck by how different it felt from Tombstone. The buildings here were newer, the streets wider, and there was an energy in the air that spoke of prosperity and growth. They found her aunt's boarding house on a quiet street near the edge of town, a large two-story building with a wide porch and flower boxes in the windows. Catherine knocked on the door, and after a moment it swung open to reveal a small, gray-haired woman with sharp blue eyes and a welcoming smile. "Catherine," Aunt Margaret cried, pulling her into a fierce hug. "Oh, my dear girl, I am so glad you are here. Come in, come in." "Aunt Margaret, you look well," Catherine said, relief flooding through her. "Your letter made it sound as though you were at death's door." "Oh, that," Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "I may have exaggerated a bit. I needed help with the boarding house, and I knew you would not come unless you thought it was urgent. But where are my manners? Who is this handsome young man?" Catherine felt herself blushing as she made introductions. "This is Kade Nolan. He was kind enough to escort me from Tombstone and ensure I arrived safely." Margaret's sharp eyes moved between them, and Catherine could see her aunt drawing conclusions. "Well, Mr. Nolan, I cannot thank you enough for looking after my niece. Will you stay for supper?" "It is the least I can offer in gratitude." Kade glanced at Catherine, and she found herself hoping he would say yes. "I would not want to impose." "Nonsense, it is no imposition at all," Margaret said firmly. "Besides, I want to hear all about your journey." Catherine's letters never include enough details. They followed Margaret inside, and Catherine was pleased to see that the boarding house was warm and well-maintained, with comfortable furniture and the smell of something delicious cooking in the kitchen. Margaret settled them in the parlor and bustled off to finish preparing the meal, leaving Catherine and Kade alone. "Your aunt seems to be in perfect health," Kade observed quietly. "Yes, she does," Catherine said with a mixture of exasperation and affection. "I should have known she would do something like this. She has been trying to convince me to move here for months." "Are you angry?" Catherine considered the question. "No, not really. Annoyed, perhaps, but I understand why she did it. And truthfully, I needed to leave Tombstone. There was nothing left for me there." She met his eyes. "Besides, if she had not sent that letter, I would never have met you." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Kade took a step closer, and Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She could see the pulse beating at the base of his neck, could smell the leather and sage scent that clung to him. His hand came up as though he might touch her face, but then Margaret's voice called from the kitchen, breaking the spell. "Supper is ready." They ate at a large table in the dining room, and Catherine found herself relaxing as Margaret regaled them with stories of her boarding house guests and the colorful characters who populated Silver Ridge. Kade contributed his own stories from the trail, and Catherine watched the way his face animated when he talked, the way his rare smiles appeared more frequently as the evening wore on. After supper, Margaret showed Catherine to a lovely room on the second floor with a view of the mountains. "Get settled," she said, "and then come down and help me clean up. We have much to discuss." When Catherine returned to the kitchen, she found her aunt washing dishes while Kade dried them. It was such a domestic scene that it made her heart ache with longing for something she had convinced herself she did not want. "Mr. Nolan was just telling me about his business here in Silver Ridge," Margaret said. "Apparently, he has been hired to investigate some cattle rustling for the Henderson Ranch." "How long do you expect that to take?" Catherine asked, trying to sound casual. Kade shrugged. "Hard to say. Could be a few days, could be a few weeks. Depends on what I find when I start asking questions." "Well, you will need a place to stay while you are here," Margaret said briskly. "I insist you take a room at the boarding house. I have a vacancy on the first floor, and the rate is very reasonable." Catherine's heart leaped at the prospect of having Kade nearby, but she tried not to let it show. "Aunt Margaret, I am sure Mr. Nolan has other arrangements. Actually, I do not, Kade said, and Catherine thought she detected amusement in his voice. I was planning to find a hotel, but if you have a room available, Mrs. Jordan, I would be grateful to take it. It is settled then, Margaret said with satisfaction. Catherine, show Mr. Nolan to the room at the end of the hall while I finish here. Catherine led Kade down the hallway to a pleasant room with a large bed, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the side garden. My aunt is very direct, she apologized. I hope she did not pressure you into staying here. She did not, Kade assured her. He set his saddlebags on the bed and turned to face her. I wanted to stay. I know my business here in Silver Ridge is temporary, but I would like to spend more time with you while I can, if that is something you would want as well. Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. I would like that very much. They stood there for a long moment, the awareness between them crackling like lightning. Then Kade took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I have not felt this way about anyone since before Matthew died, he said quietly. I thought that part of me was gone, but being with you has awakened something I believed was lost forever. I am frightened, Catherine admitted. I have worked so hard to protect myself, to not need anyone, but you make me want to take risks again, to open my heart even though it terrifies me. We can take it slow, Kade said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. There is no need to rush. Let us just see where this goes one day at a time. Catherine nodded, unable to trust her voice. Kade lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, and the sweetness of the gesture made her eyes sting with tears. When he finally released her hand and wished her good night, she floated back down the hallway feeling as though her feet barely touched the ground. The next few weeks were some of the happiest Catherine could remember. She fell into a comfortable rhythm at the boarding house, helping her aunt with cooking and cleaning and managing the guests. Margaret proved to be a delightful companion, full of wisdom and wit, and Catherine found herself laughing more than she had in years. But the best part of each day was the time she spent with Kade. He would leave early in the morning to pursue his investigation, riding out to the Henderson Ranch and surrounding area to look for evidence of rustling. But he always returned in time for supper, and afterward, he and Catherine would sit on the porch and talk as the stars came out. Sometimes they would walk through the town together, and Kade would tell her about what he had discovered that day. Other times they would simply sit in companionable silence, content to be near each other. Slowly, carefully, they learned each other's stories. Catherine told him about her childhood in Missouri, about the dreams she had once harbored of becoming a teacher before her parents died, and survival became more important than aspirations. Kade shared memories of growing up on a small farm in Texas, of learning to rope and ride from his father, of the close bond he had shared with his brother. Matthew was always the better cowboy, Kade said one evening as they sat on the porch swing. He had a way with horses that I never could match, but I was better at tracking. I could read sign that he would ride right past. You complement each other, Catherine observed. You must miss him terribly. Every day, Kade admitted, but being here with you helps. It reminds me that life goes on, that there can be joy after loss. Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, and Kade's arm came around her naturally, as though it belonged there. They stayed like that until the night grew cold, wrapped in each other's warmth and the possibility of a future together. Kade's investigation was progressing, though slowly. He had discovered evidence of cattle being driven off Henderson's land under cover of darkness, and he was working to track where they were being taken. The work kept him busy, but he always made time for Catherine, and she found herself falling more deeply in love with him with each passing day. One afternoon, Margaret sent Catherine into town to pick up supplies from the general store. While she was there, she ran into a woman named Sarah who ran the local dress shop. They struck up a conversation, and Sarah mentioned that she was looking for someone to help with sewing. "Business has been growing faster than I can keep up," Sarah explained. "I heard from your aunt that you worked as a seamstress in Tombstone. Would you be interested in taking on some piecework? I can pay you by the garment and you could work from home." Catherine agreed immediately. She had been wondering how she could contribute financially to the household, and this seemed like the perfect solution. She collected several garments that needed hemming and alterations and carried them back to the boarding house, already planning how she would organize her time to fit the work in around her other duties. That evening, she told Kade about the opportunity over supper. "It feels good to have work again," she said. "I love helping Aunt Margaret, but I need to feel as though I am contributing something beyond just labor." "You contribute far more than you realize," Kade said. "Your aunt told me yesterday that you have transformed this place. The guests are happier, the meals are better, and she actually has time to rest now instead of working herself to exhaustion." Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Still, it will be nice to have my own income again. Independence is important to me." "I know it is," Kade said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "It is one of the things I admire most about you. You have spirit, Catherine. You refuse to let the world make you small." That night, as Catherine worked on her sewing in the parlor, Kade sat nearby reading a book he had borrowed from Margaret's collection. The domestic tranquility of the scene was not lost on either of them. This was what a life together might look like, Catherine thought. Quiet evenings working side by side, comfortable in each other's presence. The thought filled her with such longing that she had to set down her sewing for a moment and collect herself. Kade looked up from his book. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Catherine said softly. "More than all right. I was just thinking how happy I am right now in this moment." Kade set his book aside and came to kneel beside her chair. He took both of her hands in his gray eyes intense. "I love you, Catherine. I know we have not known each other long, but I am certain of my feelings. You have brought light back into my life, and I cannot imagine going back to the way things were before I met you." Tears filled Catherine's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too, Kade, so very much." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her then, gentle at first and then deeper, pouring all of his emotion into that single kiss. Catherine's arms came around his neck, and she lost herself in the sensation of being held, being cherished, being loved. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Marry me," Kade said urgently. "I know it is fast, I know we should probably wait, but I cannot stand the thought of being without you. Say you will be my wife, Catherine." "Yes," Catherine whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They told Margaret the next morning over breakfast, and the older woman looked so pleased that Catherine suspected she had been hoping for exactly this outcome. "I knew the moment I saw you two together," Margaret said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "The way you looked at each other, it was clear as day. When do you want to have the wedding?" Kade and Catherine exchanged glances. "Soon," Kade said. "I still have work to finish here in Silver Ridge, but once that is done, I want Catherine to be my wife before anything else can keep us apart." "We should wait until you have solved the rustling case," Catherine said practically. "I do not want you distracted from your work because you are thinking about wedding plans." "Everything I do, I am thinking about you," Kade said with such sincerity that Catherine felt her heart melt. "But you are right. Let me finish this job and then we will have the wedding. 2 weeks, 3 at most, and I should have this wrapped up." True to his word, Kade threw himself into his investigation with renewed focus. He had been tracking the rustlers' trail for days, and he was closing in on their operation. He spent long hours in the saddle, following leads and gathering evidence. Catherine worried about him, especially when he came home exhausted and sometimes bearing new bruises or scrapes from his work. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after their engagement, Kade returned to the boarding house looking troubled. Catherine met him at the door, immediately sensing that something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, leading him to the parlor. Kade sank into a chair and ran his hands through his hair. "I found where they have been taking the cattle. There is a box canyon about 15 miles northeast of here, hidden by rock formations. They have been rebranding the stock and then selling it to a buyer in New Mexico." "That is good news, is it not? You found them." "The problem is there are at least 8 men involved, maybe more. I cannot bring them in alone, and when I went to the sheriff today, he was not much help. He says he does not have the men to spare for a raid on an operation that size." Catherine frowned. "So what will you do?" "I am going to talk to Henderson tomorrow, see if he can round up some of his ranch hands to help. With enough men, we can surround the canyon and catch the rustlers red-handed." Kade looked at her, and Catherine could see the worry in his eyes. "It will be dangerous, Catherine. I want you to know that." "I know," she said, moving to sit beside him and taking his hand. "But this is your job, and I trust you to be careful. Just promise me you will come back to me." "I promise," Kade said, pulling her close. "I have too much to live for now to take unnecessary risks." They sat together in the quiet parlor, holding each other, and Catherine tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. She had just found happiness, just opened her heart to love again. The thought of losing Kade was unbearable. The next few days were tense. Kade met with Henderson and his men, planning their approach to the rustlers' hideout. Catherine threw herself into wedding preparations to keep her mind occupied, working with Margaret to plan a simple but beautiful ceremony. She altered one of her mother's old dresses, transforming it into a wedding gown, and each stitch was like a prayer that Kade would return safely. Finally, the day came when Kade and the ranch hands were ready to move against the rustlers. Catherine woke before dawn to find Kade already dressed and checking his weapons. She got out of bed and went to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Be safe," she whispered against his back. Kade turned in her arms and kissed her deeply. "I will come back to you," he promised. "I have a wedding to attend, remember." He left as the sun was rising, and Catherine watched from the window until he disappeared from view. The day that followed was the longest of her life. She tried to work on her sewing, tried to help Margaret with the household tasks, but she could not focus. Her mind kept conjuring terrible scenarios, images of Kade injured or worse. Margaret finally sat her down in the afternoon and pressed a cup of tea into her hands. "He will be fine," she said firmly. "That man of yours has survived this long by being smart and careful. He is not going to let anything keep him from marrying you." "I hope you are right," Catherine said, her voice shaking. "I love him so much, Aunt Margaret. If something happened to him, I do not know what I would do." "Then you would survive," Margaret said gently. "Because that is what we women do. We survive. But it will not come to that. Kade will return, you will get married, and you will build a beautiful life together." As dusk fell, Catherine sat on the porch, straining her ears for any sound of approaching horses. The streets of Silver Ridge were quiet, everyone inside having their supper. The waiting was agony, and Catherine found herself praying harder than she had in years. Finally, as the last light was fading from the sky, she heard the thunder of hooves. Catherine jumped to her feet as a group of riders came into view, and her heart nearly stopped when she saw Kade at the front, sitting tall in the saddle. He was dirty and there was a cut above his eye, but he was alive and whole. Catherine ran down the steps and into the street, and Kade dismounted in one smooth motion, catching her as she threw herself into his arms. "You are back," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "You came back to me." "I promised, did I not?" Kade said, holding her tight. "It is over, Catherine. We caught them all, and Henderson has his cattle back. The sheriff has the rustlers in custody, and I am officially done with this job." "Then we can get married," Catherine said, pulling back to look at his face. "As soon as you want," Kade confirmed. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "How does tomorrow sound?" Catherine laughed. "Tomorrow sounds perfect." They were married the next afternoon in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Catherine wore her altered wedding gown, and Kade wore new clothes that Margaret had insisted on buying him. Margaret stood as Catherine's witness, and Henderson stood up for Kade, having developed a friendship with the tracker during their time working together. As Catherine walked down the aisle on her aunt's arm, her eyes were only for Kade. He stood at the altar looking at her as though she were the most precious thing in the world, and Catherine felt her heart overflow with love and gratitude. They had found each other against all odds, two wounded souls who had learned to trust and love again. The preacher led them through their vows, and when Kade slipped a simple gold band on Catherine's finger, she felt as though her life was finally beginning. They were pronounced husband and wife, and Kade kissed her with such tenderness that several people in attendance dabbed at their eyes. After the ceremony, Margaret hosted a small reception at the boarding house. The guests from the boarding house attended along with Henderson and his wife, Sarah from the dress shop, and several other people Catherine and Kade had befriended during their time in Silver Ridge. There was food and music, and Catherine danced with her new husband as the sun set and stars began to appear. "Have I told you how beautiful you look today?" Kade murmured as they swayed together. "At least a dozen times," Catherine said with a smile, "but I do not mind hearing it again." "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and I am the luckiest man alive," Kade said seriously. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret marrying me." "I could never regret this," Catherine assured him. "You saved me, Kade. Not just on that stage, but in every way that matters. You taught me how to trust again, how to hope again." "You saved me too," Kade said, pulling her closer. "You gave me a reason to want a future instead of just existing from one day to the next." That night, in the room that Margaret had prepared for them, Kade and Catherine consummated their marriage with love and tenderness. Catherine had been nervous, having no experience with such intimacy, but Kade was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, talking and laughing in the darkness. "What happens now?" Catherine asked, tracing patterns on Kade's chest. "Where will we live?" "I have been thinking about that," Kade said. "I have some money saved from my work, and Henderson offered me a job as his ranch foreman if I wanted it. The pay is good, and it comes with a house on the property. It is not a big place, but it is ours if we want it." Catherine propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "You would give up tracking." "I would give up anything to build a life with you," Kade said simply. "I am tired of living on the trail, tired of danger and violence. I want a home, Catherine. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every evening. I want to build something lasting." "Then yes," Catherine said, her eyes shining. "Let us take the job in the house and build our life together." They moved into the foreman's house 2 weeks later. It was a modest building with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a comfortable sitting room, but it felt like a palace to Catherine. She made curtains for the windows and planted flowers in the small garden out front. Kade proved to be an excellent foreman, managing Henderson's ranch hands with fairness and competence, and Catherine continued her sewing work for Sarah, while also taking on some bookkeeping duties for the ranch. Their first year of marriage was not without its challenges. They argued sometimes about money or household decisions, learning how to navigate disagreements without losing sight of their love for each other. Catherine miscarried their first pregnancy at 3 months, and they grieved together, holding each other through the pain and disappointment. But through it all, their bond only grew stronger. When Catherine conceived again a few months later, they were cautiously optimistic. This time, the pregnancy progressed smoothly, and on a crisp October morning in 1883, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Matthew after Cade's brother, and when Cade held his son for the first time, Catherine saw tears streaming down her husband's face. "He is perfect," Cade whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for giving me this gift." Catherine reached up to touch his face, her own eyes wet. "We made him together, out of our love. He is a gift to both of us." Little Matthew was a happy baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. Catherine discovered that she loved motherhood, finding joy in the small moments of caring for her son. Cade was a devoted father, often coming home from the ranch to find his wife and son waiting for him on the porch. When Matthew was 2 years old, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, for the wild roses that grew along the fence line of their property. Rose had her mother's features and her father's serious temperament, and she and her brother became inseparable companions. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Cade was promoted to part owner of the ranch when Henderson decided to semi-retire, and Catherine's sewing business grew until she had to hire 2 assistants to help with the workload. They built an addition onto their house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Margaret remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting often and spoiling her great niece and nephew shamelessly. When Matthew was 8 and Rose was 6, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was more difficult than the previous 2, and Catherine spent the last 2 months on bed rest. Cade hired help to manage the household and care for the children, refusing to let Catherine do anything that might put her or the baby at risk. Their third child, a son they named James, was born in the spring of 1892. He was smaller than his siblings had been, and the birth was difficult, but both mother and baby came through it healthy. The doctor told Catherine that she should not have any more children, as another pregnancy could be dangerous for her health. Catherine and Cade accepted this news with equanimity. They had been blessed with 3 healthy children, and that was more than enough. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Matthew grew into a serious young man who loved working with horses, following in his uncle's footsteps. Rose was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. Little James was the family jokester, keeping everyone entertained with his antics and boundless energy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cade surprised Catherine with a trip back to Tombstone. They left the children with Margaret and spent 3 days retracing the journey that had brought them together. They visited the stage coach office, where Cade had first intervened on Catherine's behalf, and they laughed at how young and uncertain they had been. "I knew that day that you were special," Cade said as they stood outside the office. "I just did not realize you would become my entire world." "I was so frightened," Catherine remembered, "of traveling alone, of trusting a stranger, of letting myself hope for anything beyond simple survival. But you made me brave, Cade. You made me believe in possibilities again." They renewed their vows in a small ceremony at the Tombstone Church, and Cade gave Catherine a new ring, a beautiful band with 3 small diamonds representing their children. Catherine wore it alongside her original wedding band, treasuring both as symbols of their enduring love. The years continued to pass. Matthew married a rancher's daughter when he was 21, and they gave Kade and Catherine their first grandchild, a girl named Catherine after her grandmother. Rose went away to San Francisco to study at a women's college, becoming a teacher just as her mother had once dreamed of being. James stayed close to home, working alongside his father at the ranch and eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations as Kade grew older. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85, leaving her boarding house to Catherine. Catherine and Kade converted it into a home for widows and orphans, ensuring that Margaret's legacy of helping others would continue. On a warm summer evening in 1907, Kade and Catherine sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. They were both in their late 40s now, with gray threading through their hair and laugh lines etched around their eyes. Their hands were clasped together as they rocked gently in the swing Kade had built years ago. "You ever think about that day at the stagecoach office?" Catherine asked. "How different our lives might have been if you had not spoken up all the time," Kade admitted. "Though I cannot imagine any other life now. This, right here, this is everything I ever wanted and more than I ever thought I deserved." "We have been blessed," Catherine agreed. "Not that it has always been easy, but we have faced everything together. That has made all the difference." Kade turned to look at his wife, seeing the girl she had been and the woman she had become, and his heart swelled with love. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he said softly. "And I am still the luckiest man alive." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, just as she had done so many times over the years. "I love you, Kade Nolan, today, tomorrow, and always. And I love you, Catherine Nolan, my brave, beautiful wife who changed my life the moment I saw her." They sat together as darkness fell and stars began to appear, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life full of love, laughter, and purpose. The stage driver had refused to let her board alone, and a cowboy had said she was riding with him that day. It had seemed like a simple act of kindness at the time, but it had become the foundation of a love story that would endure for the rest of their lives. Years later, when their grandchildren asked about how they met, Kade and Catherine would tell the story of the stagecoach and the outlaws and the long journey that brought them together. But what they always emphasized most was not the dramatic circumstances of their meeting, but the choice they had made to trust each other, to open their hearts despite their fears, and to build something lasting out of a chance encounter. Their youngest grandson, a boy named Thomas after the stage driver who had inadvertently brought them together, once asked Catherine what the secret was to a long and happy marriage. Catherine had thought about it for a long moment before answering. "The secret is choosing each other, every single day. Not just on the good days when love comes easily, but especially on the hard days when it requires work. Your grandfather and I built our marriage on trust, respect, and a willingness to face life's challenges together. We never stopped being grateful for each other, and we never took our love for granted." Kade, listening from his chair by the fire, had added his own wisdom. "And never forget to laugh together. Your grandmother has kept me laughing for over 30 years now, and I plan to spend whatever time I have left making her laugh too." As the years advanced and they moved into their 60s and then 70s, Kade and Catherine's love only deepened. They were fixtures in the Silver Ridge community, known for their generosity and the strong example of their marriage. When younger couples faced difficulties, they often sought counsel from the Nolans, knowing they would receive honest advice tempered with compassion. Catherine continued her charity work, expanding the home for widows and orphans until it was recognized throughout the territory. Kade remained active in ranch management well into his 70s, though he gradually turned more responsibilities over to James. Their greatest joy, however, came from their growing family. Between their 3 children, they eventually had 11 grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren born before Kade's health began to decline. In the winter of 1919, Kade fell ill with pneumonia. Catherine nursed him devotedly, sitting by his bedside day and night. Their children and grandchildren visited frequently, filling the house with love and noise, but Kade's favorite moments were the quiet times when it was just him and Catherine, holding hands as they had done for nearly 4 decades. "Do you remember what I promised you that first night at the way station?" Kade asked one evening, his voice weak but his eyes still bright with love. "You said we would take it slow, one day at a time," Catherine remembered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "And we did," Kade said with satisfaction. "We took it one day at a time, and those days added up to a lifetime. I regret nothing, Catherine. You gave me a beautiful life." "You gave me the same," Catherine whispered. "You taught me how to love, how to trust, how to be brave. You were my partner in everything." Kade squeezed her hand weakly. "Promise me you will keep living, keep finding joy. Do not let my death stop you from embracing whatever time you have left." "I promise," Catherine said, though the words nearly broke her. "But you have to promise me something too. Promise me you will wait for me. When my time comes, I want to find you waiting." "I will wait forever if I have to," Kade assured her, "but I have a feeling it will not be that long. You have never been good at letting me go anywhere without you." Despite the seriousness of his condition, they both smiled at that, remembering the countless times Catherine had insisted on accompanying Kade on trips or errands, claiming she did not trust him to pick out proper supplies or make sensible decisions without her input. Kade passed away peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by his family. He died holding Catherine's hand, and his last words were, "I love you." Catherine was devastated by his loss, but she kept her promise to keep living. She remained active in her charity work and spent as much time as possible with her children and grandchildren, sharing stories of their grandfather and the great love story that had shaped all their lives. Catherine lived for another 8 years after Kade's death. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, still sewing garments for those in need and offering wisdom to anyone who asked. On a peaceful spring morning in 1927, she passed away in her sleep at the age of 68. Her children found her with a smile on her face and a letter clutched in her hand, the first letter Kade had ever written to her, which she had treasured for decades. They buried Catherine next to Kade in the Silver Ridge Cemetery, beneath a large oak tree with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The headstone was simple but meaningful. "Catherine and Kade Nolan, 2 souls, 1 heart, together again." At the funeral, James stood to speak about his parents, and his words captured the essence of their remarkable love story. "My parents taught us that true love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It is about choosing each other every day, supporting each other through good times and bad, and building a life based on trust, respect, and partnership." They were not perfect people. They argued sometimes. They made mistakes. They faced hardships like everyone else. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. They turned a chance meeting on a dusty street in Tombstone into a love story that will inspire our family for generations to come. In the years that followed, the story of how Kade and Catherine met became a cherished family legend, passed down through the generations. Their great-great-grandchildren would grow up hearing about the brave young woman who refused to be stopped by obstacles, and the cowboy who intervened when the stage driver would not let her board alone. It became a story about courage, trust, and the transformative power of love, a reminder that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single act of kindness and a willingness to take a chance on a stranger who might just turn out to be the love of your life. The house where Kade and Catherine raised their family remained in the Nolan family for over a century, each generation adding their own memories while honoring the legacy of the couple who built it. The wild roses that gave their daughter her name continued to bloom along the fence line every spring, a living reminder of beauty persisting through hardship. And on warm summer evenings, family members would sometimes sit on the old porch swing carefully maintained and repaired over the years and imagine they could feel the presence of Kade and Catherine, still together after all this time, still watching over the family their love had created. Their love story had begun with a simple statement, "She's riding with me today." But those 6 words had changed everything, setting in motion a chain of events that would create a family, build a legacy, and prove that even in the harsh realities of the Wild West, true love could not only survive but flourish. Kade and Catherine had found each other against all odds, and they had built a life that honored both the challenges they faced and the love that sustained them through it all. It was a story of the American West, but more than that, it was a story of the human heart and its infinite capacity for hope, healing, and love.